The screams started before the flames. One moment, they were church members, followers of a man that they called His Holiness. The next, human touches. Their bodies were engulfed in fire, their cries were piercing through the walls of the Christian praying assembly. The man responsible, their own pastor, Reverend King. Chukwuemeka Ezugo, better known as Reverend King, wasn't just another Nigerian pastor with a flashy title. He was the general overseer of the Christian Praying Assembly, CPA, a church based in Ajao Estate, Lagos. To his followers, he was more than a pastor. He was a divine figure, above reproach, beyond questioning. But inside the walls of his church, Reverend King ruled like a dictator. He demanded absolute obedience. He controlled what his followers wore. He controlled how they spoke. He even controlled who they interacted with. To disobey him was to risk punishment, and for some, that punishment was deadly. Reverend King, who was 40 years old at the time, had a reputation for extreme discipline. Members of his church lived in fear of his violent outbursts. He would whip followers, beat them mercilessly, force them into harsh, humiliating punishments, all in the name of purification. But no one dared question him, because in CPA, Reverend King was not just a man, he was a god. The event that led to his downfall happened on July 22nd, 2006. That day, Reverend King accused several of his members of fornication, one of the worst sins in his eyes. The accused were mainly young men and women, ranging from their early 20s to mid-30s. Among them was Ann Uzo, a 21-year-old church member who had been part of the CPA for years. Reverend King was furious. He didn't just want to rebuke them, he wanted to make an example of them. And the punishment that he chose? Fire. He lined up 6 of them inside his residence on the church premises. With no hesitation, he doused them in petrol, the strong, suffocating smell filling the room. Before anyone could react, he lit a match. And just like that, the room turned into an inferno. Just like hell, flames erupted, licking at their clothes, their skin, their hair. Screams filled the air, desperate, agonized cries. Some managed to escape with severe burns, but Ann Uzo, she suffered the worst injuries, with over 65% of her body covered in burns. She was rushed to the hospital, but after 11 excruciating days of pain, she succumbed to her injuries on August 2nd, 2006. By the time the police arrived, Reverend King wasn't panicked. He wasn't even trying to hide. He acted as if nothing had happened, as if setting people on fire was just another church ritual. But the law had had enough. The law had caught up with him. On September 26, 2006, Reverend King was arraigned before the Lagos State High Court in Ikeja. He was charged with 1 count of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. During the trial, more disturbing details emerged. Church members testified about the brutality that they had endured for years. Some described how he had beaten followers to the point of unconsciousness. Women spoke about his controlling behavior and disturbing punishments. But despite the overwhelming evidence, guess what? Reverend King pleaded not guilty. It didn't matter. On January 11, 2007, the court found him guilty on all counts. His sentence, death by hanging. He was also given 20 years imprisonment for the attempted murders of the other 5 victims. But Reverend King was not done fighting. He wasn't done at all. For years, he fought his conviction, appealing his case at every opportunity, but the courts refused to grant him freedom. His final attempt came in 2016 when he appealed to the Supreme Court of Nigeria. Justice Sylvester Ngwota delivered the final ruling. He was horrified by the facts of the case. He compared Reverend King's actions to something out of a horror movie. The verdict, his death sentence was upheld. Most people assumed that would be the end of Reverend King's influence, but shockingly, his church, the Christian Praying Assembly, it still exists today. Despite the brutal nature of his crimes, many of his followers remain loyal to him. They still refer to him as His Holiness. They believe that he is a divine being, a Messiah sent by God. In 2021, reports surfaced that Reverend King was still sending prayers from prison to his congregation. His followers even celebrated his birthday every single year. They didn't miss. They would take out paid newspaper advertisements to honor him every year. Even though he's locked away in Kirikiri maximum security prison awaiting execution, his influence has not completely died. He's still alive. His influence is still alive while his victim is not. As of 2025, Reverend King remains on death row. He is one of the over 2,700 inmates awaiting execution in Nigeria, many of whom have been there for over a decade. The justice system moves slowly, and until the sentence is carried out, Reverend King is alive, while Anne Uzo is not. A pastor, a murderer, a man who called himself holy while turning his followers to human sacrifices. And even now, some still call him king.